Cadet Raylan Hartwell stood at the edge of the training arena, her boots gripping the cool, metallic surface beneath her. The hum of the station vibrated through the air, the distant echoes of voices and the occasional clank of heavy armor filling the otherwise sterile atmosphere of Upsilon Ventus 4. A day like any other, until it wasn't. Her heart beat in a steady rhythm, unshaken by the noises around her. She was used to the clamor. What caught her attention now was the figure that strode into the central square of the arena, a being so far removed from human that it looked like something out of a nightmare. Tall and lithe, with obsidian scales shimmering beneath the artificial lights, the Xel'Nar cadet, Kvaran, cut an intimidating silhouette. He was everything humans were not, powerful, graceful, and deadly. But to Ray, he was also a challenge, one that had been a long time coming. Kvaran was known across the Federation for his skills in combat, his speed, and his arrogance. He was an elite warrior of the Xel'Nar, a race with a long-standing reputation for military supremacy. No species dared to challenge their strength, their methods, their absolute belief in their superiority. Until now. Ray pushed a strand of blonde hair out of her face and took a deep breath. The other cadets were already gathering around the arena, whispering excitedly amongst themselves. The alien students of various species looked on, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and quiet amusement. To them, humans were a novelty, young, untested, and mostly unremarkable. "Ready for your humiliation, human?" Kvaran's voice rang out across the arena, smooth and taunting. His words echoed in the high walls, his deep voice drawing the attention of every cadet present. His long tail swished behind him with barely contained irritation. He was used to dominance, to being the center of attention. And he wasn't about to let some human cadet change that. Ray didn't flinch. Instead, her lips curled into a thin smile. "You should have checked your records, Xel'Nar," she said, her voice steady, betraying no trace of fear. "The only thing getting humiliated today will be you." The words hung in the air, cutting through the tension. Some of the cadets chuckled quietly, though many shared uncertain glances. Human cockiness was legendary, but Kvaran wasn't just any opponent. He was a beast in combat, a lethal force with years of battle experience under his belt. Kvaran's eyes narrowed, his nostrils flaring slightly. "We shall see," he muttered, more to himself than to Ray. His hand hovered over the sleek, silken blade at his waist, a weapon forged by his people, far sharper than anything humans could wield. Ray's hand went to the hilt of her standard-issue training blade. It wasn't much, but it had become an extension of herself. A simple weapon for a simple soldier, she reminded herself. No tricks. No special enhancements. Just skill. The way it should be. She stepped forward, her boots scraping across the metallic floor as she took her position in the center of the arena. The air crackled with the silent energy of anticipation. The cadets around her fell silent, leaning in as they waited for the duel to begin. "Human," Kvaran said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you should be aware that this is not just a test of strength. It is a lesson. You will learn your place in the galaxy today. And you will learn it well." Ray tightened her grip on the blade. Her muscles tensed, but her mind was already focused, already strategizing. Kvaran had underestimated her. The Xel'Nar were formidable fighters, quick and precise, but they relied heavily on their physical prowess. Ray had learned to rely on something far more important, her adaptability. "We'll see who learns what," she replied evenly. She wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of losing control. The artificial gravity control flickered for a moment, signaling the start of the match. Kvaran was the first to move, sweeping in with impossible speed, his blade flashing in the light like a streak of silver lightning. He aimed for her side, clearly hoping to catch her off guard. His movements were a blur, a testament to his species' inherent speed. Ray's eyes locked onto him, watching his every motion, analyzing his attack before it even came. She wasn't fast enough to match him head-on, but she didn't need to be. At the last possible moment, she sidestepped with a fluidity that surprised even herself, narrowly avoiding the tip of his blade as it sliced through the air where she had just been standing. The crowd gasped. Kvaran's eyes flickered with irritation. He hadn't expected her to evade so cleanly. But he didn't pause to reconsider. He came at her again, more vicious this time, swinging in wide arcs designed to overwhelm. Ray danced back, her feet moving silently across the arena's surface, all the while calculating his next move. She could see the flaw in his technique. His strikes were powerful, yes, but they lacked the finesse she had learned to value in combat. He was used to enemies that crumbled under raw strength. Humans, on the other hand, weren't quite so easy to predict. Kvaran swung his blade down at her head, but Ray was already gone. She moved low, dropping her body into a roll and coming up on his flank, landing gracefully on her feet behind him. She could almost hear the frustration building in his breathing, the sharp intake of air as he turned to face her. He lunged, trying to trap her with a slash aimed at her neck, but Ray was already leaping backward, using the momentum to propel herself toward the nearest pillar. The Xel'Nar's hiss and growl echoed in the arena as he slashed through the air, his blade cutting nothing but the empty space she'd occupied moments before. He was no fool. He'd realized by now that brute force wouldn't win him this fight. But he wasn't about to back down either. "You are quick, human," Kvaran growled, his voice laced with a grudging respect. "But that won't be enough." Ray smirked as she planted her feet, her stance low and ready. "Just keep underestimating me," she said. "You'll find out what happens next." The cadets around the arena were watching, the earlier whispers now replaced by silence. Ray had done what most of them thought impossible. She'd matched Kvaran's strength with nothing but her speed and intellect. And it wasn't over yet. As she squared off with the Xel'Nar again, she felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about proving herself. This was about sending a message that humans were not to be underestimated. Kvaran's eyes glinted with the promise of violence as he prepared for his next move. But Ray was ready. She had the upper hand now. And she wasn't about to lose it. The arena had fallen into an uneasy silence. The distant hum of the station, the occasional whir of machinery, was all but drowned out by the tension hanging thick in the air. Every cadet, from the most hardened Zorvith veteran to the jittery human trainees, stood at the edges of the arena, eyes locked on the two figures who now circled each other in the center. The stakes were clear, the question was simple: would humanity survive the test? Ray's breath came slow, controlled. She could feel the heat of the artificial lights above, casting long shadows across the slick floor of the arena. Kvaran stood opposite her, his gleaming scales reflecting the light like polished onyx. His eyes were narrowed, his posture calm, but there was a tremor of frustration beneath the surface. He had expected this to be easy. A human cadet, no match for him. Now, he was rethinking that assumption. Ray's focus was razor-sharp. She had survived this far by outsmarting her opponents, by thinking 2 steps ahead. She didn't have the luxury of overconfidence. Kvaran was fast, deadly, and ruthless. But she had something he didn't: adaptability. Humans could adjust on the fly, outthink their opponents. Kvaran had brute strength. She had wit. "Do you know what the Xel'Nar do when they encounter something they can't defeat?" Kvaran's voice slithered across the arena, smooth and dangerous. "They crush it. Relentlessly." Ray didn't reply. She simply gripped her blade tighter, her knuckles white against the smooth, worn handle. She was acutely aware of the eyes watching, the weight of her people's expectations pressing on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her. It was about humanity's place in the galaxy. Kvaran lunged first, his body a blur of motion. The force behind his strike was enough to split a lesser cadet in 2. Ray barely had time to react, but her instincts kicked in. She sidestepped just as the blade whistled past her ear, missing her by inches. The air crackled with the heat of his strike, the speed of it almost beyond her ability to comprehend. She didn't waste time. She darted backward, using the momentum from his missed attack to push herself into a roll. Her body hit the ground, then sprang back up like a spring-loaded coil, bringing her blade into a defensive position just in time to block a second strike. The impact sent a jolt of pain through her arm, but she gritted her teeth and held firm. Kvaran's eyes flashed with annoyance. Impressive, human. But no amount of dodging will save you. Ray's pulse hammered in her chest. She could feel the sweat trickling down her neck, her breath quickening, but she forced herself to remain calm. He was right. This wasn't going to be a game of evasion. She had to outthink him. She darted to the side again, this time using the nearby pillar for cover. The Xel'Nar's strikes were relentless, his movements so fast they seemed to blur. Every time Ray thought she had a moment to breathe, he was on her again, pressing her into a corner. She realized that for all his speed and power, Kvaran was predictable. His attacks followed a rhythm, a pattern of brute force that left openings if she could read them fast enough. "Do you have anything beyond your speed, human?" Kvaran taunted, his voice a low growl. "You can dodge for as long as you want. But you can't outrun your fate." Ray's mind raced. There had to be something. Her training, every hour of grueling exercises, every mock battle, had prepared her for this. The answer clicked into place. She couldn't fight him head-on. Not yet. But she could make him fight on her terms. She feinted left, just enough to make Kvaran commit to another strike. As he swung his blade, Ray dropped low, using the momentum of his attack to spin beneath him. She came up behind him, her blade raised. This time, her strike was quick, precise, aimed for the joint in the back of his knee. She wasn't strong enough to sever his limb, but she could at least incapacitate him. But Kvaran was no novice. He spun, anticipating her move, and parried with a grace that seemed almost inhuman. The force of the impact reverberated through her arm, sending shockwaves of pain up her spine. But she didn't give up. Her legs were already in motion, ready to leap back and reposition. She wasn't in this fight to lose. Not now. Kvaran's eyes burned with a mixture of respect and fury. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." Ray didn't flinch. She knew the moment she hesitated was the moment she'd lose. She tightened her grip on her blade, forced herself to breathe deeper, slower. Focus. The Xel'Nar was a beast, stronger, faster, more deadly. But Ray wasn't trying to match him in raw power. She was playing a different game entirely. Kvaran moved again, his body a blur as he aimed for her chest this time, his strike so fast that she only had a split second to react. She ducked just under his blade, rolling once more to the side, but this time she didn't stop there. She kicked off the floor, using the pillar to push herself higher, leaping toward him with her blade extended. She was close now, close enough to see the shock in his eyes as she closed the gap, close enough to smell the heat of his skin, to feel the crackling intensity of their fight. He tried to bring his blade down in an overhead strike, but Ray twisted her body mid-air, landing behind him with a grunt of effort. She had the advantage. This time, he couldn't see her coming. Before he could react, Ray spun her blade, catching the side of his exposed arm. The force of the strike sent him stumbling forward, and Ray followed up, kicking him hard in the back of the knee. The Xel'Nar staggered, his breathing heavy, his chest rising and falling with effort. Kvaran growled, but the frustration was evident now, his arrogance cracking. "You!" Ray interrupted him with a swift movement, this time not to strike, but to disarm. Her blade darted forward, knocking his weapon from his grasp with a flick of precision. The arena went silent. Ray stood panting, her heart racing, sweat dripping down her face as she held her ground. Kvaran's blade lay on the ground, a mere meter from him, but for all his speed and skill, he couldn't reach it. His eyes were locked on her, his arrogance replaced with something else, something dangerously close to admiration, tinged with disbelief. For the first time in the fight, Kvaran took a step back. His tail swished behind him, flicking the air in frustration. You humans," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You fight like nothing I've ever seen." Ray exhaled, her body still tensed, but she allowed herself a brief, hard-won smile. "Yeah," she said, her voice rough with exertion. "You'd better get used to it." The crowd of cadets was silent, as if the fight had already shifted their perception of her, of humanity. Ray wasn't just surviving anymore. She was winning. And Kvaran? He wasn't sure how to handle that. The duel wasn't over yet. But the balance of power had shifted. And Ray Hartwell? She was ready for whatever came next. The air in the arena felt thicker now. Ray could almost taste it: sweat, adrenaline, and the stifled anticipation of an audience on the edge of disbelief. Kvaran stood before her, his eyes narrowing with a quiet rage, the silence between them stretching taut like a wire pulled to its limit. His tail flicked behind him, the muscles in his jaw tightening as he glared at the disarmed blade on the floor. Ray's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her face calm, her body still as she took measured steps forward, placing herself in a position of dominance. She wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing her winded. She wasn't about to let anyone see her falter. "You had me on the ropes," Kvaran growled, his voice low and filled with venom. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Ray didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than words. Her blade gleamed in the light, a simple weapon, but one that had become more than just a tool. It had become an extension of her will, of her determination. She wasn't here to play by the rules he expected. She was here to change them. Kvaran seemed to sense the shift, and without warning, his hands shot out toward his sides. There was a flash of motion, and Ray's instinct screamed at her to move, but too late. From the shadows of his body, hidden beneath his armor, a set of razor-sharp energy blades materialized, crackling with lethal intensity. The Xel'Nar had weapons she hadn't seen before, weapons that bent the laws of physics itself. The cadets around the arena gasped. "You weren't expecting this, were you, human?" Kvaran's voice was tinged with dark satisfaction as he ignited the second blade, the twin weapon now poised at his sides, ready for the kill. Ray's eyes darted to the weapon. A surge of unease pulsed through her veins, but she pushed it down. Fear had no place in her mind now. She had to adapt again, this time, not just to his physicality, but to the weapon that had now leveled the playing field. "You think you've won, don't you?" Kvaran taunted, his voice still full of that unshakable arrogance. He stepped forward, his energy blades slicing the air, creating deadly arcs of shimmering light. "But you haven't even seen what I'm truly capable of." Ray took a breath, steadying her nerves. She'd trained for this. Not energy blades specifically, but she knew how to read an opponent's movements. Kvaran was good, but overconfidence was his weakness. He was trying to intimidate her, and it might work on others, but not on her. The first strike came in an instant, the blade moving faster than her eye could track. Ray sidestepped, just narrowly avoiding the lethal arc of light. She spun to the side, feeling the crackle of energy whip past her, the heat from the blade almost grazing her skin. She wasn't just dodging anymore, she was reading him, his posture, the way his shoulders twitched before the strike. It was an edge she had, and one he hadn't counted on. "You're slower than you think," Ray muttered to herself, more than to him. She darted in, her blade flashing forward. This time, she aimed for his exposed side, testing his reaction, forcing him to block. He parried, the sheer force of his weapon sending a shockwave down her arm, but she held firm, meeting his strength with her resolve. For a moment, it seemed like a stalemate, both of them circling each other, probing for an opening. But Ray's mind was moving faster than her body, calculating angles, figuring out his rhythm. She'd been in battles before, real battles, where one wrong move meant the difference between life and death. And this, she realized, was just the same. Kvaran swung again, the energy blade cutting through the air with a hum. Ray ducked under it, sliding low to the ground, her body flowing smoothly with the motion. She came up from behind him, slashing at the vulnerable space between his armored plating. But Kvaran was quicker than she anticipated. He spun, his blade meeting hers in a shower of sparks. "You're good, human. I'll give you that," he growled, more surprised than anything. "But it won't save you." Ray gritted her teeth, sweat stinging her eyes. He was starting to slip, just a little. His strikes were coming with less precision, more fury. His arrogance, once a weapon, was now his downfall. He was angry, frustrated that a human had pushed him this far, that a human was still standing after all of it. You think you can beat me? Xel'Nar's voice dropped to a low snarl. You'll never. Before he could finish, Ray leapt forward, using the momentum of his overextended strike to her advantage. She brought her blade in a precise, angled slash, aimed directly at his wrist. For a split second, time seemed to stop. Xel'Nar's eyes widened, his defensive posture too slow to prevent it. The blade connected. A flash of light erupted as the energy blade sliced through the air. The strike wasn't powerful enough to sever his arm, but it was enough to send a shock of pain through him, disrupting his control over the weapon. Xel'Nar staggered back, growling in pain as his energy blade flickered and wavered. Ray didn't wait for him to recover. She surged forward, her blade sweeping down with a force that sent him reeling. She used her body weight to push him off balance, striking again, this time at his vulnerable shoulder. The impact was enough to make Xel'Nar stumble, his breath sharp as his body jerked with the force of her attack. He didn't fall, but he was visibly shaken. Ray's heart pounded in her chest, the rush of adrenaline fueling her resolve. You're too human, Xel'Nar spat, his voice low and dangerous, almost in disbelief. How are you still standing? Ray stood tall, her breath steady now. She had pushed him to his limits. She knew it. And now, it was time to end it. You should have learned earlier, she said, her voice soft but firm, every word carrying the weight of her entire fight. Humans don't quit. We don't give up. We adapt. We win. Xel'Nar's eyes flickered with a mixture of rage and grudging admiration, but it was clear he understood now. The fight had shifted irreversibly. He couldn't match her in adaptability. He couldn't match her in determination. The final blow came swift and unexpected. Ray's blade found its mark, slicing cleanly across the exposed joint of his armor. The Xel'Nar staggered, his chest heaving as he dropped to one knee, the fight draining out of him in an instant. The arena erupted into stunned silence. Ray stood over him, her stance proud but controlled. She could hear the faint whispers of awe from the other cadets, the disbelief thick in the air. Xel'Nar's tail flicked weakly behind him, his once imposing figure now diminished, a shadow of its former arrogance. You're not like the others, he murmured, his voice low with reluctant respect. Ray looked down at him, her blade still raised. No, she said simply, a smile tugging at her lips. We're not. The fight was over. The message had been sent. And the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again.